afternoon, everyone, or good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. I am Kevin Tayebaly, one of the founders of ChangeNOW, and I'm really pleased to be with you today to discuss a really important topic. There are four main equations that we have been trying at ChangeNOW to showcase concrete solutions to in the past few years, which are climate change, obviously, the overusage of our planetary resources, the building of a more inclusive world, and finally, the loss of biodiversity. And while the climate issue has been really picking up in the past few years, and we see that it's now started to be taken into account in the strategies of our companies, in the decisions, in the way decisions are taken at an economic level or political level, we feel that biodiversity still remains an emerging subject. And yet, the loss of biodiversity is probably going to be the next crisis we all have to find collective answers to in a very short future. The biodiversity loss and the extinction of species is actually one of the major concerns of scientists. We know for sure that human activities, they ignite significant pressure on the ecosystems, such as land and sea usage and degradation. The pollution of our air, of our soils, the climate change that is caused as well by increased level of greenhouse gases, and the overusage as well of resources that nature depends on. And the figures speak by themselves. I'm sure you know most of them, but I'm still going to remind them to you. There's been a 68% decrease of mammals, of reptiles, of birds since the 70s. There's been an 85% decrease of wetlands since the pre-industrial era. There's been a 75% decrease of insects in the past 30 years, and yet we don't seem to realize that the loss of biodiversity sustains, the biodiversity itself sustains our, individual livelihoods. More than 50%, I've said it this morning during the opening, more than 50% of the loss of biodiversity today comes from the way we eat. More than 50% of our global GDP is directly linked to biodiversity. Or, to put it bluntly, everything we do, we wear, we eat, we earn, we feel, we think is somehow connected to nature. So, what would be left anyway in terms of GDP without nature? Nothing. More than 10% of the carbon emissions are captured today by marine and terrestrial life, while we are at the same time also responsible for reckless deforestation. And finally, we all know it, we've seen it in the past few months. Nature plays a key role in the prevention of pandemics. So, to put it in a nutshell, we live beyond our means, and it's time that we find solutions, we all act together on this. And you'll see during these 3 days at ChangeNOW, you'll find some solutions that are contributing to helping address this issue by measuring the health of our soils, by protecting bees and forests with the usage of data, of AI, reintroducing insects in the food value chain, and many more. And this afternoon, together, we are going to discuss with really inspiring speakers, what are the various challenges that we see today that are preventing us, our leaders, the economic, political, institutional, space to do more on this topic and to act on this issue, which needs to gain more awareness. And we'll see that awareness is actually a major issue that explains also partly the reason why we're not accelerating on this. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker this afternoon, who is Michel André, that I would like to welcome on stage now. Michel, it's a great pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hello.
Let me quickly introduce you to our audience. So you are the professor of the Technical University of Catalonia in Barcelona.
Yeah.
And you're the founder and director of the Laboratory of Applied Bioacoustics. You have dedicated a lot of your research on the development of acoustic technologies for the control of noise pollution in the marine environment. And you are also the founder, and this is something that we are going to be speaking about more specifically this afternoon, of the Sense of Silence Foundation, which is a charity you started in 2014, which basically provides perceived acoustic tools for the conservation of wild fauna in remote areas such as Amazonia, where life is threatened. And so basically, I mean, to put it bluntly, you are a noise expert. So let's start with the first question. I understand that you just came back from Amazonia.
Yes, I came back 2 days ago.
Yeah, how was your trip? And could you tell us a little bit more about, what was the purpose of your visit there, what you did there?
Yes, the trip was long. It's a long journey, but the mission that we have in the Amazon is to monitor biodiversity. We know a lot about how many trees are cut, how many trees are burned. We have images from satellite and from drones and from planes, but we have very little data on how much life is below this canopy. And all the scientific approaches in the past have led to taking some samples and extrapolate this result to the rest of the forest, while it is very difficult to penetrate. The technology we use based on the listening of sounds, and we may have some time to discuss about what we do, this technology allows us to understand biodiversity and detect possible external problem coming from climate change, as you were saying, but also from human activities.
Okay. So basically, you measure the loss of biodiversity, with sound, right? I mean, or you measure the activity of biodiversity with sound in the Amazonian canopy. And my question to you is, why would you use sound and not anything else?
Yes, sound has the property to propagate much longer, much far away compared to any other means. The image is cut after a few meters because there are so many trees that you cannot see much. The animals have evolved in a way that they hide in the forest, so this is difficult to take pictures, although we also do that. But sound has the property to propagate far, and this allows us to monitor an area with a single sensor. It's a microphone that is able to capture the different sounds that even human ear is unable to hear. We know that we're not able to hear all the sounds that nature makes. And with the sensors that we call nodes, there are these sensor nodes, we are able to capture all these nuances of the sound at a distance that not another technique would allow. So we monitor really square kilometers compared to a few meters with a camera.
I have with us a recording of your work. Mm-hmm. It would be great if we could listen to it. So Michel, what did we just listen to?
Well, this is a recording that I just brought back from this expedition, as you were saying, that we conducted in the last month. And so this is the recording of the rainforest in the Amazon, like in a reserve, like in Brazil, Amazonas state, where we have started this very long-term initiative that aims at deploying thousands of these sensor nodes that we are speaking of to monitor the whole Amazon forest. And this is where we started 5 years ago, and we are expanding this network of sensors. And what we just heard now is one of these recordings taken by the sensor node.
Why do you think that recording, this activity with sound can help us, combat the loss of biodiversity? Why do you think that this technology is really innovative?
Yes, I would start to say that sound is truly the only support on Earth that all living creatures share. And I'm speaking about also plants, animals and plants, and in marine environments as well as in the rainforest. This is the only support of information that all living beings share on Earth.
Plants as well?
Plant as well. Sound has two components. The first one is the pressure, so this is the acoustic pressure, the one that we can hear. And then we have this mechanical component that is the vibration. And plants are sensitive to this vibration. And so sharing the same capacity of perceiving the sound provides the monitoring of nature through sounds, a unique tool to understand biodiversity and to take the pulse of the planet. So studying the sound doesn't have any borders, so we can compare what is going on in the ocean as well as in the Amazon forest. The ecosystem are not seen now as a marine ecosystem or rainforest ecosystem. We are speaking about a planet ecosystem, and sound is the common component that we can use to compare. And when we look at the pulse of the planet, we need to take into account all of these sounds. In the Amazon, we know that the role that the Amazon forest has is he plays a big role as any rainforest to help us breathe on this planet together with the ocean, of course. And we are seeing in the last years that the respiratory exchange in the Amazon is changing. While in the past it was providing more oxygen than CO2, now it is providing more CO2 than air. And this is something that is of a concern, of course, because the balance of these gases for us to breathe as human beings, but as also any creature living on the planet, is of concern. So sound allows us to take this pulse. The technology that we developed allows us to process the data in real time. So through AI techniques, we are able to identify the different sources, and we are speaking about thousands of these sources. There are what we just heard. There are hundreds of these sounds from insect, birds, primates, from fish too that we couldn't hear at that time. And so this technology allows us to really get a picture of the soundscape, and this picture allows us to understand the state of the health of the planet, and in that case, this Amazon jungle, and to detect the problems that could come from climate change again, but also from human activities.
And I understand that this technology that you just described is derived directly from your work on ocean noise pollution. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. Tell us more on that? Yeah.
Yes, everything started 30 years ago when we were studying communication in the ocean and found out that there was a lot of noise coming from human activity, from shipping, oil and gas exploration, Navy maneuvers, construction of windmills. All these activities at sea, all our activities at sea produce noise. And we didn't know about that. We think that this is a new pollution, but it's not. It started exactly at the same time when we started to explore the ocean in an industrial way. And the only difference is that this noise pollution is invisible to our eyes. And it's invisible, but also it's inaudible. We all know this World of Silence in the 50s, this movie from Cousteau and Louis Malle that described the ocean as the world of silence. This is totally true, but only for human beings. We are not able to listen underwater, to hear underwater, and we spend our whole life, human life, ignoring this sound dimension in the ocean, when sound in the ocean is life. Without sound, there is not another way for the creature living in the ocean to exchange information that is vital for their survival. So if we pollute the channel of communication, we condemn the ocean to a loss of biodiversity, and then we follow. As human beings, we are part of this biodiversity, and if we condemn the ocean, we are the next stage to be condemned on this planet. So we started to look at this effect of noise pollution back in the 90s and understood that this invisible pollution was really affecting the food chain, not only the animals or the species that we know use sounds for their daily activities, and I'm thinking at the moment to the whales. We know they exchange, they produce sounds, but we found that invertebrate species, cephalopods, crustaceans, coral reefs, jellyfishes, bivalves, all these creatures, thousands of species that do not have any ear, that cannot perceive the acoustic pressure, they perceive the mechanical aspect of the sound, but they perceive it. When you expose them to human sound, human noise, they present acoustic trauma that are not compatible with their life. And the whole food chain is affected by the noise pollution. And so this is really an urgent matter to face. It's not well known, as you said, this is considered as a new pollution. While we ignore it for 80 years, while we were dealing with plastic, that is of course something that everybody knows, and we can see it. We ignored during 80 years that we were polluting the ocean with our sounds. And now for the last 20, 30 years that we know that this exists, we have the responsibility in our side, science, to detect this effect and to propose the solution to address this very important issue.
When you mention noise pollution, you mean, I guess, you know, cargo transport, you mean oil and gas drilling, you know, deep sea mining, and I'm sure as well wind turbines, right?
Yes, wind turbines, this is very interesting because we consider wind turbine as a clean energy, and we ignored when we promote it that the construction of these windmills goes through a phase where you have to put a big nail, some hundreds of meters long, into the ground, into the bottom of the ocean with a huge big hammer. And this hammer, when it impacts this nail, this pilot, makes a lot of noise, and this noise is one of the most intense sound source that human can produce underwater. And when you do that, you put at risk a few species around a certain, so not the whole ocean, but there is a certain range where these species, and I'm speaking about flora and fauna, can be affected by this noise. So you really, everything that we do in the ocean introduces noise. The good news about noise compared to other sources of pollution that we know of is that compared to plastic that we know have a lifetime in the ocean of 3 to 4 centuries before it disappears, the sound, when you shut it off, the effect are gone. So this gives a lot of hope because we can develop technology to isolate the sound, and we work on that, not only our group but other colleagues in the world, to limit this effect of the operators. So we accompany these efforts. We want to help to maintain this cohabitation between human activity that are necessary for our planet, but also to be taking care of the conservation of this ecosystem, and particularly these oceans.
Michel, you've been, I think you've been trying to bring awareness on this issue for the past decades, and I'm sure that you are actually in touch with a lot of people when you teach classes or you give conferences on, I know personally, on boats and in the Antarctica or in many other places of the world. Do you think, because I read a study by WWF that was published last week, that says that there seems to be an eco-awakening, an ecological awakening around the world, around the issue of biodiversity preservation, and I think it's also due to the crisis that we're facing. Is this something that you've seen in the past few years, or do you think that people are more aware? What's your view on that?
Yes, you're right. I think it's quite recent that we see this phenomenon. And you mentioned the Sense of Silence Foundation, that one of its aims is to provide access to society, to nature through the sounds that it makes, and to try to expand this message to the world to act as fast as we can. We are close to rupture point of nature. It is giving signs that we are close to it, and we probably see it. Our generation will probably see this rupture, and we have in our hands a way to slow down this process and maybe to change it, and we believe that we can change it, and if we are here, ChangeNOW, we can change that. But yes, I think that because of the pandemic, we as human beings have started to fear for our own survival and understand that we should be part of nature. I strongly believe that we lost this contact with nature when we started to articulate our own language. We often speak that the industrial era is when we had this rupture with nature. I personally believe that that comes much earlier, 150,000 years ago, when we started to speak our own language, which has prevented us to understand the message from nature with the sounds. I mentioned that sound is the only support of information that we all share on Earth, and this has put human beings outside of nature. And this is the time now. We don't have much time left. This is the time to bring back human beings into nature and not speaking about human beings and nature. We are part of the biodiversity. Our survival is part, as you said, of the biodiversity. If we speak about biodiversity loss, we are speaking about our own loss. So we are facing this challenge. It is a big challenge, and you said it. I think this is the most important challenge that we are facing now, is to maintain the biodiversity as the way it is, try to regenerate it whenever it is possible, and I believe we can do it if we come back to nature.
So Michel, there's a lot of people watching us at the moment. What do you want to tell them? You know, what should we all do individually and collectively? What do you think are the solutions?
Well, I would like to say and to tell everyone, I don't know if the camera is there. Can I speak to the camera?
It's here.
Is the camera here? Okay, so I would like to speak to the camera and to say that listen to nature. This is easy. You don't have to go to the Amazon. You can just go in a big city or in your garden. There are birds, there are insects, the wind in the trees. They're all bringing the same message that every single living creature on Earth understands. We are the only one to have lost this connection. So bring back this connection, start to listen again to nature, these simple sounds. And I think that together we will change everything.
Thank you, Michel.
Thank you.
It was such a delight to have you with us today, and for this great, testimony. I'm really a big fan of your work, and thank you for your trust in coming here. I know that you've been traveling a lot in the past few days, and it was a challenge, but we made it. And you can count on us, to really push your messages, to how many channels we can.
Thank you very much, Kevin. This is of a big help. Thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you. And so we'll now move towards the second and third part of this great discussion on biodiversity preservation. And we'll try to focus more on what is the vision of the business community on this aspect. How is the loss of biodiversity addressed by our economic and political leaders? What are the challenges that they face to bring this topic to the top of their agendas? And what are the best practices that they've seen on the issue? So stay with us. We will start with a video that was shot a few days ago from the group Clarins, which some of you may know this. They've been working on the preservation of biodiversity since the mid-80s. One of the first large companies to do so. And we will then move to the third part of this session with a live discussion, and I'm sure which will be quite lively, with Pavan Sukhdev from GIS Impact, Francesco Bellino from BCG, and Laurence Pessez from BNP Paribas. So stay with us. Thank you. So we just heard a really powerful and alarming testimony from Michel André. And I guess the underlying question for us as citizens and professionals is, well, what can be done to prevent the next crisis? What can companies do to tackle the biodiversity issue? What are the solutions available for them? And to discuss this topic today, I'm really delighted to welcome here on stage, Christian Courtin-Clarins, who is the president of the Supervisory Board at Groupe Clarins, and Virginie Courtin-Clarins, who is the Deputy Executive Director and Head of CSR at the Groupe Clarins as well. And the goal of this exchange today is to discuss what is the vision of this biodiversity issue and what can companies do to incorporate this issue in their strategy and in their business decisions on a daily basis. So my first question to you, Christian, is, the first step of action for companies is to really understand what are the different pressure points of their own activity on biodiversity. And then once they're able to measure it, then to think on the levers to reduce it, because you can't reduce what you don't measure. So my question to you is, how do you measure your own impact?
To answer to your question, I have to come back to the story of Clarins. My father started with 6 products that were 100% pure plant extract. So it means that the first day we were very concerned, by the plants, and we start to love them. He used to bring me to the Musée des Sciences Naturelles in Paris, and I was totally flabbergasted by all the ethnobotanistes, the botanists. For me, I was young, they look like druid, people that make formulation, people that make miracles. My father, in fact, was a true precursor because he already understood very quickly that we have to protect the ingredients, and only in 1985, I realized what he was meaning, because it's the word, a new word appeared, the word biodiversity. And the biodiversity made me realize that we made some mistake in the past, and there was a lot of things that we have to do for the future. And that was the story and the philosophy of Clarins. We don't have only to protect the nature, but we have to restore the biodiversity. We work, with a lot of different plants. We have more than 200 plants, in our catalog, regular plants. We scan about 400 of them every year in order to be sure that we have always the best. And all this knowledge, all those people that we meet that grow those plants help us, to build what we want to do is to restore the biodiversity. I always say something, nature does not need us, but we need the nature, and we owe everything to it. So by saying that, you have to respect the nature, you have to respect the biodiversity, you have to do your maximum in your personal life and in your business life in order to work, to help, to shape and to restore the beauty in our world. So it's the best way, is also after to prove what we are doing. So there is a lot of different impacts, and we have to do diagnostic, and we use the UEBT label. And I think that my daughter will tell you a little bit how we use it. But that gives us, to answer to your question, that's the way we are able to know our real impact with numbers.
So measuring, reducing, recreating. Once you started measuring and then reducing your impact on biodiversity, the second step of action for companies is to present solutions to recreate a positive condition for nature to blossom and to find ways to accelerate its redeployment. So I guess you have a lot of content to share on this aspect. Could you tell us how do you achieve this at Groupe Clarins?
At Clarins, we take care a lot about the environment. And we have a very strict policy when we choose our ingredients. We have a policy that is both restrictive and positive. Restrictive by prohibiting techniques that are harmful to the environment, but also positive because it preserves the good balance of biodiversity. We also have developed an internal tool that we call Greenscore. It calculates the environmental, social and health impact of a formula. By 2025, all of our products will have been scored by the Greenscore, and we have the aim to improve the score by 10%. We have also put in place control over ingredient sourcing, option toward 100% organic farming practices and reasonable agriculture, as well as fair trade. And we want to go even further with agroecology and reforestation programs. Let me talk to you about traceability and transparency, because it's a main goal for us. That's why we have established in 2020 a Sustainable Sourcing Charter. In this charter, for example, we want to accelerate the conversion in organic. In 2020, 40% of our plants were organic, and we want to reach 80% of organic plants in our formula by 2025. That is also why we have created the Domaine Clarins in the Alps in 2016, and it's an integral part of this logic of sustainable agriculture, vertical sourcing and short-circuit production. There, we can have traditional and organic farming methods, natural inputs, wild picking and horse-drawn plots. In the Domaine Clarins, we do everything to ensure production system is adapted to nature, cycle and seasons.
So Virginie, you just mentioned the Domaine Clarins. Christian, could you tell us more about the Domaine Clarins?
You know, the Domaine Clarins, it was a dream and it was a vision. At the beginning, it was difficult for me to convince, but very quickly I was helped by the family, and today I'm very happy to say that the Domaine Clarins is at the heart of our commitments and became so structuring to implement, our vision. The Domaine Clarins is about 10 hectares, located in the altitude of 1,400 meters, and more than a simple parcel of land, it is an exemplary production site. It brings together all the advantage of a virtuous and quality production. Plants grow with a season rhythm in a pollution-free soil according to the organic farming criteria. No equipment, no heavy mechanical material, because we only use horses to gently work on the land. From those perfect and ideal conditions come an optimal plant harvest. Plants are highly titrated, which means that they are very qualitative. At the best ingredient, and it's our philosophy, to do a good product you need a good ingredient. So the best ingredient make the best product.
Thank you, Christian. Virginie, why do you think the experimentations on your domain are so important to you, and more importantly, how do you use it to drive change internally and all across the value chain?
The climax of our approach is a form of contract with the future. We have to do better for the next generation. It's an obligation that we want to link with the land. A living, regenerated soil is also a response to climate change. It's a natural carbon sink. The idea is to move from a culture of bad habits or negative impact to a culture of regeneration and basically to give back to the planet what we take from it. The next step for us is the regeneration of the soil. This is why we just signed a real environmental obligation contract, called also ORE contract, between the Domaine Clarins and the Conservatory of Natural Areas of Haute-Savoie, called ASTERS. It is a first in the world of cosmetics. The Domaine Clarins has committed to the longest time frame of the ORE contract, 90 years. This contract is an example of Clarins' willingness to act over the long term in favor of biodiversity. We want to continue to cultivate in harmony with the local ecosystem. We want to improve knowledge about farming in alpine environment, for example, about erosion, about the adaptation to climate change, etc. We also want to provide everyone our technical and scientific capacities to contribute to fundamental research on biodiversity. As an example, we will work on a preservation project around the orchid, a plant that you might not know but is an endangered species list.
Virginie, let's talk now about governments. How do you include biodiversity in your daily business decisions? What are the processes and organizational tools that you would recommend for companies who want to integrate biodiversity in their strategy and who would want to develop a narrative for all stakeholders?
First of all, we have a referent label approach. We are committed to adhere to a very demanding label called UEBT, Union for Ethical Biotrade, to test our sourcing methods even more and demonstrate our involvement in making biodiversity a strategic component in our decision-making. UEBT validates that a company sources ingredients from biodiversity through a system that respects people and nature. We study up to 10 supply chains per year at an environmental and social level. We decided to partner with UEBT because we wanted to have a management system that covers all three pillars of sustainability. We diagnose not only the supplier, but all the actors through the field where the raw material is coming from. We also analyze together the situation on topics such as regenerating biodiversity, reducing agrochemicals, improving soil, respecting workers, supporting local development and much more, in order, of course, to improve it. Another example is the partnership we have since 2008 with the Pure Project to incite companies to invest in social and environmental programs. Through this partnership, we have already planted over 500,000 trees since almost 10 years.
So now, Christian, let's talk about challenges. What do you think are the main challenges faced by Clarins today? Are your targets reached? What, in your opinion, could be done to go even further on this matter?
So, as I said before, the main challenge for us is that the loss of biodiversity is very important. And we need absolutely to work to help to restore it. Our targets are not to reach and to have, and we have to be even further. As an example of our action, we work to restore the mangrove. As response to the issue of resilience, coasts are exposed to larger storms, rising water level, and the mangrove will mitigate the negative effect. The loss of biodiversity will be reversed with the mangrove, which will reintroduce natural protection for hundreds of species. By extension, marine species will be able to grow and benefit to the local fishermen people. Another example where I'm very proud is that we did permaculture, in Picardy. Picardy is where we plant, I don't know the name, I think it's roots, beetroot. And beetroot to have sugar. And it's land that is totally green with intensive agriculture. We plant about 2,200 trees to restructure the biodiversity. And we did it with a woman because a woman was very sensitive. She was a farmer and she said, the fertility of my land is disappear because I put so many entrants. And now, thanks to you, I'm able to do and to grow plants in a very beautiful way. We want our raison d'être, our raison of being, to be like a compass, pointing us to the direction of all our action. And for this reason, we decide to change our company status this year and to include our raison d'être.
Now, Christian, just before we end this discussion, we are ChangeNOW. We're here to end on a high note as well and to share hope. What would be your recommendation and a message you would want to share with the rest of the business community?
For the business community, I will tell them that we have been a company citizen of the world since, I will say, 85, when we discovered that we have to protect the biodiversity. And I must say that at the beginning it was difficult. But every day I noticed that people were very proud to work in a company that consider that we have to participate to the future of this world. And that's even helped me to hire excellent people that move from one bigger company that come to us because they say, I want a raison d'être. And that was very important. So I have to make a compliment to you, because when you create ChangeNOW, it's extremely important because you have been able to gather a lot of business people that were very interested in what we can do. I had a lot of questions, and I can tell you that I'm one of your salesperson, because I ask all of them to join us because the big advantage of the business world is that we know what's meant to be efficient. We know how to do things, and if the vision is pure, if the vision is authentic, that's a very, very important, we will succeed. So thank you to ChangeNOW, and thank you to all the business people that really want to participate to make a better world.
Thank you so much, Virginie and Christian, for this fascinating talk. I guess we couldn't end on a higher note. So now stay with us, because we're going to move to the third and final part of this great session on biodiversity conservation. In this third panel, we will actually broaden the scope of solutions to other sectors, from fashion to infrastructure, food and agriculture. As you will see, all sectors have a key role to play in the way we can all together address this topic. Thank you very much. And now for the third part of this session, I'm really pleased to welcome on stage Pavan Sukhdev, Laurence Pessez, and Francesco Bellino. Hello, Francesco. Hello, Laurence. Hello, Pavan. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Hi, everyone.
Hello. You are connected from India at the moment?
No, actually from a small town called Nyon, somewhere between Lausanne and Geneva.
Okay, so you're not too far from us.
Yeah. My family is in India, yes.
Great. So let me quickly introduce the three of you. Pavan, you are an environmental economist known for your work improving the merit of greener economies. In particularly, you work on the economics of ecosystems and biodiversity. And you also founded GIST Advisory, which helps governments and corporations discover, measure, value, and manage the impacts of natural and human capital. And you're also the president of WWF International. Thank you so much for being with us today, Pavan.
My pleasure.
Laurence, you are leading the corporate you are leading the corporate social responsibility at BNP Paribas, and you are also the board member of both the French think tank, the Institute for Sustainable Development and International Relations, IDRI, and Finance for Tomorrow. Thank you very much for being with us, Laurence.
My pleasure.
And Francesco, we've actually spent quite a lot of time in the past few weeks together, and we'll tell you a little bit about the study that we've conducted together. You are a partner at BCG in Paris, and you are the leader of the sustainability practice at BCG in Paris. And well, welcome to you today, and I hope that this will be a great discussion.
Happy to be there.
So let's start. We've seen and we've discussed it at the very beginning of this session that the climate issue is a topic that has been now quite addressed and is in the process of being addressed by our leaders today from the economic and political side. But we've seen that the same doesn't hold true when it comes to biodiversity preservation. And I'm really eager to have your views on that, on the reason why do you think we have such a gap. And some statistics are actually quite quite important to showcase this fact. We've seen Francesco in the recent few weeks. We've been speaking with a lot of leaders, and you actually conducted a survey among the CAC 40 companies in which you were saying that about 33% of companies today in the CAC 40 have a dedicated biodiversity strategy.
Absolutely, no, and I think it's indeed something that is quite striking when we look at the difference between where we stand today on climate and where we stand today on biodiversity. It starts, I was sharing with Laurence earlier, even from the way we look at the topic. If you look at the World Economic Forum, the way they assess the risk on climate and biodiversity, it's number one and number two risk raised today. On climate, they call it climate action failure. You have the word action, you have the failure, we need to go there and deliver. On biodiversity, it's called biodiversity loss. It shows that basically we are not there yet with the trigger that needs to happen on let's put some actions on the biodiversity side. And it's true, as you were saying, we are 1/3 of the CAC 40 companies that today have built these actions we need to complete. And then beyond the actions, and in the introduction you were making, you mentioned measures. We also need to make sure that we're able to assess the impact of these actions on a complex topic at a moment where we see more and more people in the society expressing the feeling that biodiversity is impacting their life. We conducted recently a survey in the UK where we saw that there is already 16% of the population who basically said, yes, biodiversity is impacting my daily life.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we've seen a study in the EU, actually, out of 25,000 respondents, 16% of the public was saying that the loss of biodiversity had affected their lives in a way or the other. So this figure is also, it's true for the businesses, it's also true for the public. There is a misconception issue here. And another figure really hit me was the fact that only 5% of companies today believe that this issue affects directly their shareholders and the stakeholders. What do you think about that, Laurence?
Yes, it's true. It's surprising because we don't get any interest from investors, from ESG rating agencies, for example, on biodiversity topics. It's not part of the conversation we have at CEO levels with our big clients, because I think the link between the biodiversity loss and the economic impact is not that clear. There is no consensus, as there is now on climate. Everybody knows what's the goal and everybody's converging towards it. Apart from sectors where it's really material, such as the agriculture sector, I think the link between the fact that some corporates deeply rely on natural ecosystem services and it could impact their profitability and resilience is not on top of the radar of the business leaders and the financial industry so far. But we see encouraging signals. We see, for example, Dutch central bank establishing that I think 36% of the investments of the financial institution rely on natural ecosystems. So it's a figure, and you need a figure to start doing things and improving the situation.
You're right, we need those figures. What do you think, Pavan?
I completely agree with Laurence. I mean, you cannot manage what you do not measure. And I think part of the success of the climate movement and perhaps some of the challenges that we are facing in what I would call the nature movement, because I have issues with the term biodiversity, I'll explain in a minute. I think part of that is to do with the discourse and how we frame it. If you think about climate, let's go back to the 1970s or thereabouts. It wasn't there. It was only in the 80s that the issue even got tabled. At that point, nature was already an issue. WWF had been founded in 1961. People were concerned about losing nature, and it was called that. Coming to the climate world, what has been done well is the drivers, the outcomes, and the impacts have been well defined and well described. The key driver is greenhouse gas emissions. We can measure them. Companies can measure how much they emit per year and try to target reductions. The outcomes are, again, well described. It's about storms, cyclones, floods, droughts, sea level rise, increase in temperature, the disturbances that we see to entire value chains as a result of changes in climate. And then the impacts have thankfully been well described as well and distilled into one single number, which is degrees Celsius, the increase in temperature over time from historic levels, right? So when you have clarity in this value chain of explanation, drivers, outcomes, and impacts, and even though, by the way, the impacts have left out quite a lot. In an earlier session, you mentioned the impacts on the oceans. That's been left out. In fact, the oceans absorb a large part of the carbon dioxide that our economic systems emit. And that leads to the declining alkalinity of the ocean. Basically, carbolic acid is formed. And that leads to the loss of biodiversity in the oceans. Coral reefs get affected, fish species get affected, anything that has carbonaceous material inside it, which is all fish, gets affected. So there are impacts which we don't actually calculate and talk about. We calculate and talk about degrees Celsius, but that's very sharp, and that is a good sign that we've figured out what to use in terms of the metrics. So I think part of the challenge of not being able to manage what we are trying to measure is actually a challenge of metrics. And we need to get cracking on this. Time is running out.
You're right, time is running out, Pavan. And staying with you, you know, I was mentioning a little bit earlier this study from WWF that I'm sure you've read, talking about an eco-awakening in the world, all around the world, and giving this number of, you know, real surge in terms of, you know, how many Google search there are, how many tweets there are in the world on nature loss and nature preservation since mainly, I mean, in the past few years, but also since the pandemic hit. Do you think that in a way, and I think there's a figure of a 550% increase of Google tweets, Google hits and tweets in India last year. Do you think that in a way this crisis is reconnecting us again to nature?
That's in some ways that's probably its only silver lining, sadly. I mean, the pandemic, especially in my country, in India, has taken a very severe toll and continues to do so. And I think understanding that, you know, this could have been because of a leakage of virus from some wild species, maybe bats, into the animals that we humans consume, and then from there into us, and then transmitted through our economic systems. I think that awareness is there. And that sort of showed us, because we know that when we destroy nature, that's when humans and animals come, wild animals come into contact, and viruses spread. Now, China has only got 6% forest cover, or if we look at, and maybe some loss of wildlife habitat and the consumption of species has led to this, maybe. If we look at places like Indonesia and Brazil, which have 40, 60% forest cover, and you see the rate at which that cover is declining and the amount of human interaction with those wild species which are displaced and are releasing their viruses. I mean, the sky is the limit to what kind of cataclysm we are inviting as a result of our lack of wisdom in destroying wild ecosystems, especially forests. So I think people are beginning to understand these fundamental issues. You know, part of the challenge of biodiversity definition, what is biodiversity? It's the living fabric of this planet. It's ecosystems, it's species, it's genes. And, you know, biodiversity is a kind of technician's term for it. I just call it nature. And you know, the Living Planet report of WWF, which you mentioned, is called that because it is about that. It's about the living planet. We need to get this. And we are still getting it slowly, but I hope we do fast.
Yeah, so it's funny, actually. People are more aware, but at the same time, they still don't associate the loss of biodiversity and the way it impacts their lives. So there's a kind of, you know,
paradox.
Yeah, it's funny that bias. Francesco, coming back to you, you know, we have recently conducted together a study on, you know, what is the strategy, the biodiversity strategies of large companies in France and abroad as well. Would you share with us some of the main conclusions of this study?
Absolutely, and you already started to share some of the figures, which I think were quite striking and interesting. But just in a couple of minutes, and I will actually start with a positive note, because I think, as you were saying, Pavel, biodiversity is the technical word. My first finding to some extent is that in roughly the 30, 40 CEOs or managers we talked to, almost all of them were already doing actions with their corporates and their companies on biodiversity, on nature actually, since quite a long time, sometimes just without putting the word biodiversity on it. So I think there is already a lot of awareness and actions, which is definitely on the positive side. The other thing that I found surprising is that we kind of ask always a bit the same questions to build some statistics. One of the questions was, do you have in your companies KPIs or measures on nature and biodiversity? Actually, more than 2/3 said yes. So today, some companies were the share of artificial lands that they were tracking, some other the impact on forests, some on the agriculture. So to some extent, the topic is there. There are some measures. What is indeed a key challenge is that if the answer is yes for more than 2/3, the KPI that is used looks a bit different every time. So we do not have the scale and we do not have the focus to really understand what is it that we need to solve, and then how can we connect the KPIs with the actions. The last finding, which again I think is more on the positive side, is that a lot of CEOs actually mentions in the engines to tackle this topic also the employees and the people in the companies. I think in the companies, the people acting on the field are getting also awareness and are more and more demanding to the companies on the way they really position themselves and address that topic, which is of good hope moving forward. But again, there is an urgency definitely. So then the question is, are we going fast enough?
Are we going fast enough? I think that's something that Jean-Laurent Bonafé would share as well. He, you know, as a president as well of BNP Paribas, but also as a president of the EPE association, he recently said that, you know, while some efforts are being made on the topic, we're still not quite where we would need to be. And I'm sure that's something that you agree with, Laurence. I'm really curious to understand, you know, what's the vision at BNP Paribas. We spoke about measurement, you know, and I think, you know, a company like BNP Paribas has a really key role to play, both as a large company, but also as a company that funds as well other companies that can influence clients and companies across the world. What's your vision on that?
Yes, you're right. The bulk of our impact is what we call indirect. It's not our impact as a bank on biodiversity. It lies with our financing and investment activities. So the corporates we finance, the projects we fund. And what we've decided to do on this is to have a twofold strategy. First, to finance the sector which are more exposed to biodiversity in the best possible way. So we've set criteria we ask our clients to comply with, to be our clients and to remain our clients. For example, on palm oil, paper pulp, agriculture, on mining. So we started setting this criteria in 2012, so we were ahead of the pack at that time. In 2019, we went one step further with ocean-related activities. We are a big financier of the shipping industry, we finance fisheries, so we also ask our clients to adopt the best responsible practices. And we recently announced criteria on soy and beef in the Amazon and the Cerrado. And we've been the first international bank to ask really very serious criteria to their clients. So that the do not harm side, if I may say so. On the other side, we have to support our clients which want to improve their strategy and to go further. And we committed to dedicate 3 billion of financing by 2025 to loans and bonds with the use of proceeds or strategy linked to biodiversity. Because we start seeing an appetite from our clients to issue bonds with the use of proceeds, for example, on forest management, or loans with criteria linked to the achievement of biodiversity criteria. For example, in the cocoa industry, a trader, we made a loan which was with an interest rate which was coupled to the number of farmers in the supply chain who would be trained on responsible agriculture, crop diversification, etc. So I think it's interesting because things are moving forward, and it's not only the agriculture sector. We have also examples on the cement industry, in the retail sector. And why are those corporates adopting a biodiversity strategy? It's not out of philanthropy. It's because for them, when you rely on nature ecosystem services, you have to contribute, protect them. Otherwise, it's your profitability, it's your resilience, which is directly affected, and it's risk management also. Because, for example, if it becomes harder to source cocoa, coffee, it means that raw materials prices are going to be higher, and your profitability will be impacted.
So in that way, you create the incentives.
Yes, yes, of course. And also there is a big reputation risk, which is high on the radar of all corporates, especially in the retail industry, when the consumers are putting pressure and the companies are moving forward.
Thanks for this answer, Laurence. Pavan, going back to you, because you're very much a figures person, and I'm really keen to understand, your vision on, why impact measurement to you is so important, and curious to hear, the work that you do as a founder of GIST Impact.
Sure thing. I mean, the purpose of GIST is to make sustainability accessible to all. And the means that we use is to actually provide measurement of externalities. So why? Firstly, why? What are externalities? These are the third-party impacts of doing business as usual. And how big are externalities? Well, externalities were estimated some years ago just for the top 3,000 companies as something like $2.5 trillion. And now, if we look at the entire private sector, it's almost like $11 trillion per annum of costs as a result of the costs of increased climate change, the cost of loss of biodiversity, the cost of ocean acidification, et cetera, et cetera. If we work these out, this is huge, right? So externalities are a cost, but what's the other side of the equation? Profits. Now, a company that has high negative externalities is basically creating private profits and public losses. Private profits, public losses, private profits. It's like musical chairs, it can't go on. This music has to stop. And externalities, how big they are. Remember, the private sector is 2/3 of the economy, right? And jobs. So it's not surprising that its externalities are going to be big. But how big they are, people don't seem to understand. And how important it is to fix this links us directly to the planetary boundaries, whether it's climate change or whether it is biodiversity and ecosystem loss. So that's the key thing. What we do in GIST is to make people, as in investors and the companies, aware of their externalities, because investors know that today's externalities in their loan portfolios as a bank or an asset portfolio as a bank or an asset manager, they know that today's externalities are tomorrow's risks and day after tomorrow's losses. And God help you if you happen to be a private equity fund and you haven't worked out the externalities in your investments and you discover them in year 8 or year 9 of a 10-year horizon. Where will you be then? Right? So you need to know. And I think most investors have understood this and they are sharply focused on understanding, especially the negative externalities, because that's where the problems lie. So measuring all of this, informing the investors, the asset managers, the asset owners, the banks and intermediaries, informing them what the size of these externalities are sector by sector is now possible. And I think the advances in science and economics and modeling, the work of TEEV, the work of so many people who've been active in this space, including my company, I think that has really led to this change in awareness that, okay, we can actually measure the impacts. We can actually measure all our positive and negative externalities, and therefore, in fact, present to ourselves first and then to our investors what we call stakeholder accounts, where you are not just measuring the impacts on shareholders, which is just increased financial capital and profits, but you are measuring the impacts on stakeholders, which means natural capital for future generations, human capital for your employees, social capital for the countries and societies in which you live and work. We can measure your impacts on all of those things. That is true performance. Performance measurement is not just about measuring profits. Yeah, this idea that it's all about shareholder accountability and shareholder capitalism is false. I disagree with Milton Friedman and anyone who agrees with him.
Thanks for this, Pavan. And there's to come back to the study that we conducted together, Francesco. There's one comment that came back several times from the CEO that we interviewed, which was the question of the ESG scoring. And quite a few of them actually mentioned the fact that the biodiversity topic is really not measured in this ESG scoring. And I, again, had this comment this morning actually with one CEO that is ending ChangeNOW in the morning. So why, do you agree with this, the three of you? And if yes, how can we change this?
Very quickly, in a second, do I agree? Yes, I think it's something that came out very clearly from our study. The reason why, and Pavan mentioned it, at some point in a dialogue between a company and its investors, you need to align on what you will be talking about. As long as we are not able to really build a dialogue on the impact of biodiversity loss specifically for a company or the value of it, not only financial, but still the value, it's gonna be perceived as qualitative discussion and hence will not get the share of importance that it deserves.
Yes, I think definitely ESG ratings deliver what investors are looking for. So if investors don't care about biodiversity, they're not going to improve their rating on this. So that's why, for example, we partnered with CDP. CDP was a specific biodiversity questionnaire in order to build a common framework. And also we were co-chair of the informal working group, which is going to give birth to the task force on nature financial related disclosure, which will be key to define the reporting framework and the metrics everybody will be aligned on. Because we need metrics, but we need common metrics, comparable, robust metrics.
I see a time running, so I'm going to ask the last question. What do you think about coalitions, and do you think that coalitions are an answer? Because we speak a lot about coalition at ChangeNOW, and the multi-stakeholder partnerships. Do you think they are an answer? Do you think, on the contrary, actually, it should be a question of competition as well, and we should put our egos on this and get companies to compare to each other? What do you think is the right way to approach it?
I think, well, we shouldn't oppose coalition and competitions, because I think coalitions shouldn't be an excuse not to do something on our own and to go first. Because if you wait for everybody to be on board and to agree on what we have to do, we lose time. So I think we have to move forward anyway. But given the complexity of the topic and its multi-stakeholder, of course, coalition is the best way to go forward. But not any coalitions. Coalitions which really deliver some outputs, which have concrete strategy, and we have to select where we spend our times and dedicate forces.
Thank you, Laurence. Pavan, do you want to build on that?
Yes, and in fact, I'll pick on a phrase that Laurence used, which is a common framework, and I think that's truly important. I mean, basically, a coalition is a network, and each network will have a preferred framework, or maybe 2 or 3 preferred frameworks. So CEOs, CFOs, CSOs today have to figure out which network they'd like to belong to. Is it EU taxonomy approach, or is it the World Economic Forum, or is it the Capitals Coalition, or all 3? And once they've figured that out, then identify the framework that they want to use. And at the end of the day, unless we can agree along those networks on a preferred framework, we are losing time again. Because remember, today's ESG methodologies have 2 challenges. One is that there's more than 600 different ESG rating methodologies, and the lack of consistency and the subjectivity, and I could go on forever. But that's a challenge. And the other side of the challenge is that an ESG rating will give you insights on what are your opportunities and what are your risks, and you should use it, absolutely. But it will not tell you your impacts. That's not the purpose of an ESG rating. It cannot measure impacts. It's not just me saying that. Even George Serafim, who's from the Harvard Business School, says exactly that. So I think we need to embrace impact measurement. We need to belong to coalitions and networks, recognizing that this is a pre-competitive space. And then we should adopt a framework and go for it. Like both of you have been saying, don't wait for the perfect answer. You'll never get it. Just identify your framework, your community, based on your coalition and your network, and then go for the framework that makes sense for you. Start applying it now.
Let's start applying it now. Is there any last words that you would want to share, Francesco and Laurence?
One word on the coalition, because I think it's a key point. I think coalitions, you were mentioning cooperation or competition. Coalition should just be a vehicle for companies to deliver on what they need and what they commit to deliver, just because it gives the scale that they cannot have alone. So it's important that, ideally for me, we will build coalitions where members hold clear responsibility on the fact that the coalition delivers and that this delivery is seen in their own company. So to avoid self-standing coalition that at some point don't even know what they're trying to achieve, and then we will have real impact.
Thank you so much, Francesco. So what is the last takeaway, the business community that is watching us today, and not even the business, all the people that are watching us today, what is the takeaways you want to give to them?
I think the awareness and the urgency to act in favor of biodiversity raises a proactive and responsible management of your supply chain and the ecosystem you rely on will turn into a definitive huge competitive advantage. And on the other hand, a poor management on those issues will affect the companies. So that's why I think it should be on top of the radar of bankers and investors, because at the end of the day, it will be a credit risk for all of us.
Thank you for this, Laurence. Pavan?
Yeah, we have entered, as some people say, an era of impact transparency. Measure impacts. And if you wish to know how, and you want to find the framework to use, just look around, meet the people in the network that you belong to, and see what they're using, identify the best one, and go for it. As you start measuring, you will start managing, and then you will start thinking differently. You will no longer be purely an organization that pursues profits, but one who pursues societal benefit as well as profit at the same time. No longer one who thinks only in terms of one capital, financial capital, but all four capitals, which means natural, human, financial, and social capital. And you will be an organization which challenges itself with creating value in all these dimensions, right? Not just for the shareholder, but also for stakeholders. You'll end up with smarter people, more loyal to you, and your brand will prosper. Actually, it will help your long-term financial performance as well. But this is about getting the right people together in great teams. And
thank you. And Francesco, last word.
Yeah. Very quickly, but I think it's, as Pavan said, the solutions are there. I think today, or at least we maybe even have too many solutions in terms of index, in terms of indicator. It's time to get together, align on which one we can pick, move forward, really to translate it into impact. But I'm optimistic that companies are taking that challenge.
Thank you so much to the three of you, Francesco, Laurence, and Pavan. It was really a delight to have you with us. And well, I guess we all have now, food for thoughts and for action. Thank you for being with us, and enjoy your time at ChangeNOW.
Thank you.
Cheers.